Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. I feel in a way that coming to a circle here because my first interview was with Jane Rosenberg LaForge, whose book, My Aunt's Abortion, is out now on Amazon, and you should go and check it out. And we spent a lot of time talking about the physical environment of fair, the feeling of the heat and the feeling of the straw. We've come full circle in that my guest today has looked around at fair and she saw all that grass and wheat and said, I can make art out of this. My guest today is Cora Hendershot, and welcome, Cora.
Thank you. And it's a little more circuitous path than you would lead viewers to believe at that opening statement, because I did not come immediately into fair and look at the grass and say, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I started out in entertainment.
Okay.
Way back in 1975 when I was fresh out of high school.
Which brings me to my first question. Who was the person who said, hey, let's go out to fair? And what did they say to get you out there?
It was a bunch of my friends from high school who the previous year had started actually working the fair, and I had been wild to go at the time. I desperately wanted to go and had no permission from my parents. So in the spring of 1975, I was a freshman in college and no longer had to ask my parents' permission, and went out there with said friends who were Dolores Hemphill, Denise Miller, and Miriam Volpin. Had various careers with the company at various times.
Were you a happy peasant?
I was a parade person.
Very nice.
Yeah, back in those days, it was St. Audrey's in the south and St. Cuthbert's in the north before they decided to do away with all that fanciness, and it was St. Cuthbert's all around. But yes, I was a person who waved the banner and sang off key, and it was a wonderful thing. And the following year, I didn't do fair, and I don't remember why I didn't do fair in 1976. Possibly schoolwork actually reared its ugly head, and I decided that was more important. Well, that was the last time I made that decision. And in 1977, I was still in parades. At that time, I had a speaking part in one of their little pageants in the street. I was the dragon in St. George and the Dragon.
You remember your line?
No, not at all. It was written by Don John DeCleese, and it was a whole performance. It was in like 5 or 6 segments. It was all in rhyming couplets. I remember that. And we did it in various places in the fair, culminating in Court Glade. And I don't remember my lines at all. I remember I had that mobile dragon. We wheeled that from place to place, and I declaimed my lines. And my only claim to fame for getting that part was the fact that I could indeed project. So
that is the first and most important lesson.
Yep.
Which brings me to another question. When you were first introduced to fair, who were your mentors, sort of thing, and what did they tell you about fair?
Well, I was a very, very shy individual, and I hung out with my high school friends, and we were the good girls gone bad. I did get to know Ernie Caswell fairly well, Peg Long, who is my first queen, Dennis to a lesser extent. And Dennis kind of scared me, so I didn't hang out with him very much.
What do you remember about Peg?
She was amazing. She was a great teacher as far as acting was concerned, which I really, when you come right down to it, didn't have a lot of interest in. But she did introduce me to a lot of people and had great stories to tell about her life as a teacher and how she got involved with Phyliss and became queen. And at that point, she was one of the 3 who were in charge of entertainment. It was Peg, Ernie, and Dennis, and they somehow managed to have a triumvirate as a working relationship, which worked out about as well, I think, as the Romans' attempts at having triumvirates.
Did they assassinate each other?
No, interestingly enough, they did not, but it was an uneasy relationship to some extent, I think, because they didn't all have the same view on what was going to happen next. And I know that Ernie was kind of always the peacemaker and the calm voice of reason going on.
What about those early fairs attracted you to come back?
Oh, the community. I really felt like I belonged there. It was really a very welcoming feeling. Everybody was very accepting. It was so much fun. We had fun at night. We had all the energy of your average 18-year-old, 19-year-olds, and played games like Fetch a Wench after dark, and a lot of singing in Actors Camp. And there was, Mark Lewis stories up there in Troll Hollow. It was a very magical time, and I really felt so involved in the whole community there that I didn't want to belong to any other community. I felt like this was it. These were my people. I was definitely primed to run away to the fair and just completely immerse myself in the whole experience, which I did in a few more years.
You described yourself as shy. Can you describe to me the person you were before you went to fair, and how did you see your life unfolding?
I didn't talk a lot. I thought that I was going to, get a degree from Occidental College. I was going to become an architect, going to lead the life of the completely straight life, and it was all going to go according to plan. Well, no. I kind of realized, due entirely, I might add, to fair, that I really did not want to do that. And that I wanted some sort of artistic life. I wanted to be part of fair. I really wanted to be a craftsperson right from the first, but I had no idea how to accomplish that.
Who was the craftsperson that sort of took you under their wing and said, if you want to do this for real?
That came down the line after I had been on staff in 1983, yes. During Dickens Fair at the Fox, I was the assistant coordinator of the crafts department under Tina Wiener. And of course, I got to know all the crafts people at that time, because I kind of went along and took notes whenever Tina made a pronouncement to the individual craftspeople, and we went around and checked on everybody's booth. And at that time, I got acquainted and very friendly with Morgan Owens Keeley, who was the first traditional corn dolly maker at Fair, weaving wheat department. And he sold me his step van at that time because I was looking for a vehicle, and he had it about halfway converted into a place to live. And significant other and I at the time took that over, and Morgan and I became increasingly friendly, and he started teaching me little bits of how to do the wheat weaving. And I stayed the assistant crafts coordinator through the next Southern Fair, after which I got fired. Morgan was looking for an apprentice, and I was looking for a job. So I did Northern Fair with him, and then essentially he set me up with a traveling booth and said, "You're doing these shows. Good luck. See you in about 3 months."
Is there something about wheat and straw that innately attracted you?
The weaving aspect, I'd been doing crocheting since I was 8 years old. It wasn't like I was new to the whole concept of handicrafts or doing things. And yes, it appealed to me because it was working with my hands, it was working with a natural material, and best of all, I was good at it. Right from the start. It came very easily to me.
So was there a clouds parted and things went, and you decided this was your path?
I wouldn't say there was one moment, but certainly during the course of that winter when we were traveling from all up and down the West Coast doing craft show after craft show, and I was doing more and more of the work because Morgan was not really very good about sending more stock. I would sell stuff, and then I need more stuff, Morgan. And he would say, oh yeah, I'll send it to you. And then he wouldn't. So of necessity, I would take wheat that I had for supposed demo purposes and actually make stock so that I'd have something to sell. So that was kind of the moment where I said, obviously one can make a living doing this. Here's Morgan with the shining light of it can indeed be done.
Do you enjoy talking to patrons or the salesman aspect of things?
Oh my God, no, I hated it. But I had my script. I had stage fright so badly at first that I had a script that I wrote out that I memorized. Speak
Would
to
you like
customers.
to share that script now?
Oh, at fair is like, good morrow. And they'd say something back to me and say, this this be a traditional craft done all over the world at one time, but these be traditional designs of the English Isles. And here I be, making the craft right here before thee. Do look around and read the stories which are attached to each history. Each history is attached to each piece. And if you do have any questions, I am here to help. And that would be my opening remark. And if they wanted more, I'd go on.
That is a very nice opening pitch. You've established that you've acknowledged them and that this is what you're doing and presenting them with something that they can respond to. And that's kind of what the fair was all about, was that you were then immersing them in your world and then just going about your business.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I failed to emphasize here is I was really involved with history and loved it, and especially the Elizabethan era. And so this was just the perfect place as far as I was concerned, because I was so involved with the history aspect of it and loved it so much. I wanted to involve the customers with the whole craft and the history of it. But there is one thing that I did find out over the years, because after a while, we kind of expanded into the straw hat industry as well, not just the traditional corn dollies which hang on the wall, which is that the corn dolly customer and the hat customer are two entirely different sets of people. Corn dolly customers like it if you kind of greet them and give them a little overview, as I just did, about the craft, and then they want to be left alone so they can kind of look through the booth, read their way through. They know you're there, but they're not talking to you until they're ready to ask a question or something. For the hat customer, by God, they want you to be right there at all times, waiting on them hand and foot. And I'm here to tell you, that's where I started having employees, because I do not do well with that.
You delegated that task?
As much as humanly possible, yeah. Because it takes a lot out of a person, at least for me, to put that much energy into each individual customer. And there is no crossover. People who buy hats don't buy corn dollies, and vice versa. It's very interesting. For a while, having a wheat goddess's hat sort of became like the way it used to be with buffalo hats. If you were a cool kid, you had one. Yeah. So I'm theoretically retired these days. I haven't done any fair since 19, when the pandemic hit. And I kind of discovered that I kind of like not doing fairs. I'd like to do Dickens in a way, but it's such a hassle as far as the commute from Southern California is concerned. That seems a little much these days.
Have you passed the art and craft of hat and corn dolly making on to some new people?
Yes, actually, my daughter is an accomplished weaver and also maker of hats. She started out when she was like 3, toddling up and, helping, quote unquote, a little bit, and grew up with the craft, saying when she was a teenager, I'm not doing this when I grow up. But after a few years in the outside world, she decided that the whole owning your own business thing was not so bad after all.
Where can listeners, does she have a website?
The pandemic kind of put a halt to all of this. So at this point, Jessie has an outside job, a regular 9 to 5, and is working on getting the website back up. So stay tuned. People can still reach me through Facebook, Cora Hendershot, And as necessary, I will pass along any hat orders to Jeff, who is definitely in charge of all the hat stuff now. I'm still making the corn dollies. So much to my surprise, people are still tracking me down and ordering corn dollies. And I'm hoping that we'll get the website back up sometime this year. Stay tuned. But I will, when the moment arrives, we will be publicizing this heavily.
Shifting gears a little bit here.
Mhm.
What sort of communication skills did you pick up and learn at Faire that you have successfully applied in other aspects of your life?
Well, certainly the ability to talk to people, whether or not I knew them. I suspect that some of this would have come with time anyway. I had been so shy, but it really gave me the ability to talk to people and also to talk with a voice of authority. Because for a while there, I was a stage manager, and you don't survive as a stage manager unless you can command a certain amount of fear and respect from the actors that are coming on and off your stage. My mentor on those was Terry Collier, who was the main stage manager at Southern Faire for many years, and I was his assistant for a couple of years, both South and North, before Dennis and Ernie decided that I could have my very own little stage. And I was the stage manager for Drury Creek.
Gave you the best stage.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the best acts, no doubt about it. That was the year of The Reeves Tale and Pyramus and Thisbe, and that truly god-awful act, The Halberdiers, which was so awful. It was amusing.
I would like to point out for those listeners out there that my first gig out at the Faire was a halberdier. And I agree. I thought of it sort of as the Keystone Cops of the Renaissance Fair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that nothing could be a better description. That whole group of people.
David was really brilliant at commanding an audience and directing focus. And as a person to model your stage presence around, I can't imagine anybody better.
I have to agree with you. He absolutely is the master of improvisation and can get up on the stage and hold any audience. It is an amazing talent. Yeah, I could depend on the Halberdiers for chaos and a fairly large audience of people who were just sitting there going, "What is going on?" But yeah, so in those days, it was definitely bam, 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 one act right after another. There was no empty stage time allowed. That was the rule, as handed down from Phyliss on high and enforced by Dennis and Ernie and Peg to some extent. And that even if the only thing that was happening was the stage manager out there sweeping the stage, there would be somebody on the stage.
Did you develop a line of patter as you swept the stage?
Oh, not really. I kind of just stood out there and swept and told people that any moment now. Oh, indeed. They would be here, but shortly. Drury Creek was a little out of the way, and therefore acts would not always be on time. Not necessarily through any fault of their own, because you can only get from one place to another so fast, especially through a crowd.
If you had a show on Drury Creek, you had to allow time to gather a crowd.
Yeah, go up on the road, on the high road and the low road both, and start hawking.
Right.
Which occasionally I would do as the stage manager too. Painful. And then later on, I had Traders Market, the very first year that they had a Traders Market.
That was a tough stage.
Well, it was the first year for Traders Market too.
Yeah.
So that was the first year that there were imported goods. And there was a hellacious amount of controversy about that.
I remember.
Yeah. That was also the year that I was the editor for the Buck and Mug, and my interviewee was David Springhorn.
Mm-hmm.
who had a lot to say about a lot of things. And he said that he was afraid that Phyliss would hurt him after the end of that interview. And he was right. She did.
Who started the Buck and Mug, and how did you get roped into it?
Lena Dunn started the Buck and Mug, the Dickens of 1978, the craftsperson's rebellion year. That was the most horrid Dickens on record. It was at the Cow Palace. Nobody came. Oh my God, nobody came. It was so many brilliant shows were there, and it had an audience of like, I'd say performers outnumbered the audience. And it was cold and it was wet, and in true Cow Palace style, everything leaked. Lena Dunn is still in business back east. Her business is a clothier business, and it's called Maresca. She started the Buck and Mug kind of as a in-house newsletter and a way to vent people's opinions about this, that, and the other thing as far as the fair was concerned. Telling Phyliss that this would not do, and that she had to do something to bring the customers in, though I'm not sure at that point, given the economics and what they had, that there was anything she could have done at that point. But that show almost put a lot of crust people under. And I was a stage manager for it at the Pennygaff. I bought the first Buck and Mug, and the second Buck and Mug was, I think, Johnny Jones's, and he was one of the people associated with Don Brown. And pretty closely thereafter, Don Brown, he kind of shepherded along the Buck and Mug and gave advice to who was ever editing, as did Michael Kimberly, who was actually the person who did a lot of the publicity and going from booth to booth and backstage to backstage selling it, which he still does, lo these many decades later.
What was the average circulation of a Buck and Mug?
I think we sold 300 copies.
Okay.
And we thought we were doing pretty damn good on that too. And I remember that mine cost $5 because we had a color. Well, I used colored paper for the cover, and there were a lot of drawings and a lot of illustrations.
Who did the drawings, and who did the layout?
I did the layout as the editor. You know, it's one of those things where you do a lot of it yourself. And that was good experience, actually, as it turns out. And my then husband at the time did a lot of the drawings, Rob Lansadell. Nobody probably, well, hardly anybody remembers anymore. I mean, he stayed with Faire, I think, maybe 5 years. But at any rate.
Did you lay it out in Word, or was there...
This is in 1985. This was before computers were even thought of. This was the old-fashioned way where you had the paper and you stripped in the text and you typed it out on a regular typewriter. And we're talking Brontosaurus type craftsmanship here. We did everything except set the type. So yes, I learned a lot, like how to do the layout, and Foley's had to be laid because, you know, if you've got multiple pages, that was a real learning experience. Nowadays, book setup is done entirely differently. Yeah, I had to decide on what font we were going to use, and did we actually, I'm trying to remember if we actually took it to a printer or not. And I kind of think we did. Though we didn't get it set in hot type or anything because we didn't have enough run for that, because we only did 200. And then we had to do a second run, which is how I know that we sold about 300, because there was quite a few left over, which Michael Kimber took off our hands and then proceeded to sell by dribbles and drabbles. There may still be a few of those kicking around somewhere.
Somewhere in a closet someplace, there is
Michael Kimber's closet, almost certainly, because he's kind of like the unofficial historian for Buck and Mugs. Anyway, so yeah, Don Brown, as you undoubtedly know, is kind of one of the nexus points for Faire for many, many years. The guy that would feed you even if you had no money and would take care of all your problems if you let him.
When you think about your fellow craftspeople at Faire, what booths and craftspeople stand out as ones who have done it right?
Well, as far as interpersonal relationships are concerned, the demise, the Phyliss Coffee House, really put a crimp in our ability to know each other because, for the most part, craftspeople have 1 foot chained to the booth all day. And the only time that we had to socialize was after hours at the Phyliss. The only people otherwise, as you ever know, are like the 5 or 6 craftspeople whose booths are right in your immediate vicinity. I gotta say that overall, Stevie Overstreet put on some of the best booths I've ever seen.
And what did she sell?
Stevie is a he, and clothing. Overstreet design, not at Fair anymore. I'm trying to think of who I really recommend that's still at Fair.
I'm trying to get not what's going on now, but
the historical aspects of it.
yes.
I really liked Ray Griswold's flower booth at Southern Fair. It was that structure with all the dried flowers hanging from it.
Yep.
Amazing. And the pinwheel booth for all-around execution and beauty was outstanding. I'd say that the trifle booth that Billy Scudder had looked really good. That was a great presentation. I really liked the booth that really looked like Elizabethan cottage, and it looked like it could actually belong to a fair or at least a village. I always looked at that stuff. Now, could I do this? And it was always kind of economically out of my reach to do some of the more impressive booths. Yeah, I said Masquerade was a beautiful booth too. But a booth that displayed the wares and was attractive and somehow kind of gave you the feeling that it was Elizabethan at the same time. Other than those, I'm trying to think of something more recent.
And something maybe in your price range or
Doable by your average person?
your average craftsperson. Yes. Well, not average, but typical.
Yeah. I gotta say that almost all the pottery booths do a really good job of presentation. Well, let me cut back on that. Kanoi was outstanding. And Amesbury's booth I've always liked, and that's definitely doable. And Schultz. Pottery booths are the ones that usually come to mind as far as not too hard to do yourself, but putting on a good display. And to some extent, of course, that's the nature of the wares. Tickle My Fancy, Barbara Butcher also does a good job, and that's definitely doable. But good signage and somehow imparting a feeling like inside here, there's something magical and wonderful, and you really ought to check it out.
Do you have any sort of advice to somebody starting their own booth on what those elements might be?
Have something inside your booth that is just decorative, that doesn't necessarily have to do with your product, that will attract people into the booth, that will make them say, "What's that? Let's go in and check that out." Like, you have a painting on the wall or some piece of art, or even, dare I say it, the booth owner sitting down there demonstrating their craft. I really believe that the demonstration of the craft is essential to a good presentation, attracting the customer while educating them. Phyllis's old saying, "We trick into learning with a laugh," is a great way of expressing what brings me to the whole craft show experience. I mean, even when I'm not at a Renaissance fair, I want to educate people as far as corn dollars are concerned, but I want them to have a good time at the same time. I want them to remember booth fondly.
Did you have like a series of fun facts to say about corn dollies to pique someone's interest if they started to talk to you? Or
fun? Yeah, it's an interesting way of phrasing it. Fun fact. Yeah, I would always say, well, it's a very traditional craft, and these designs can be as complicated or as simple as your imagination and skill will allow. And here, while I'd be demonstrating, it'd be a simple hair braid or a 4-straw fill the gap design. And this is something that any plowboy or harvester would be able to make, just as a simple memento of the harvest to give to a friend or a loved one. And these were something that were hung in the farmer's house during the winter months, and thus displaying their craft, and also as a way to help preserve some small bit of seed for the next season. Because as part of the traditional folklore, people would plant the seed from their corn dolly into the ground first in the spring when they planted the new crop.
I think that's the kind of thing that makes the fair great, is that not everybody at the fair, but for that one person who's like already had a crochet background and just sort of wandering around fair, sees what you're doing, and that speaks to her, and suddenly she's wanting to do it too and wants to buy your product. And that's what makes the fair the unique immersive environment that it is, and that you can tailor what you're doing to the person, and if the person responds, you can respond in kind.
Absolutely. And I've been very lucky with the people who work with me. Everybody who has been employed by me is somebody who essentially wandered by and got interested and sat down and did some demo with me and persisted enough to say, by the way, are you hiring? So it's always been a very organic process as far as the people in the booth are concerned. They'd be hard people to replace at this point. I mean, I'd have to start from scratch again. So, because, after 3 years of not working, people have found other things to do with them, which is one of the things that has kept us from going back to Southern Fair, for example. But it is amazing how many people over the years have gotten really involved with wheat weaving. And even if they aren't involved with the booth, a lot of people become collectors and get involved in the whole history of the craft. So education is happening. People are learning.
Well, good job.
I think is one of the things that I feel satisfied with how I have conducted my life, is a lot of people have learned something by what I had to say.
Who have been some of the people who have worked at your booth who just started by wandering by and sticking their head and saying, "What you doing?"
These are not names that anybody's going to know offhand. Jeff Jones wandered by my booth at a show I was doing in Palm Springs and was so taken with the whole thing that he started doing Southern Fair with me. Well, he is the co-author of the book that I wrote.
And what is the title of that book?
Traditional wheat weaving and corn dollies. Not coming to a bookstore near you. It does have an ISBN number and everything, but it was a self-published in a very small print, and I may or may not do another run. It's mostly an instructional, though. I mean, it's not really that much on the history of the craft. It's more in-house, more than anything else, because it's recipes for all the designs that I did at the time and pictures. If you are making pieces, it's very useful. But if you're looking for a history of the craft, it is not going to give you a lot.
Well, that sounds like a really great project and a great book, and I hope you can get it back out in the public eye soon.
Both Jeff and me to actually do something about the quality of picture and do a quick revision and maybe get it out in front of the public again.
When you graciously agreed to be interviewed, was there a story that you thought to yourself, gosh, I got to be sure to mention that?
I was more thinking, what had I better just leave out?
Well, having gone through the process so far, what do you now feel comfortable in including that perhaps you had initially thought to exclude?
Well, I was on staff at the Tobin. This is very ancient history. Up north, I had 2 runs with being on staff with Living History Center, which just goes to show that some of us are very slow learners. But I got to say that Phyliss taught me a lot, and not all of it was necessarily what she thought she was teaching people. But one of the prime things that I learned, which is office work is office work, no matter who you're doing it for, no matter how exalted the corporation's ideals, if you're an office slave, you're still an office slave. It's still scut work. So, and that really was my last experience doing office work, because I said, I'm not doing this no more. And that was really one of the prime movers to get to do corn dollies as a full-time job and to make the jump into the crafts world as a full-time occupation.
Do you remember any pearls of wisdom from Phyliss or Peg or anybody?
I got lectured to by Phyliss, because one of the, when I was working for the company the first time, I was the assistant coordinator for the education department. And that was the people who went out into the schools and taught various classes. And I was the person who did the booking, did the paperwork for the paychecks, etc. And not everybody who is an entertainer is very good at doing all the stuff necessary to keep bureaucracy running smoothly. People wouldn't turn in their damn timesheets. They'd kind of blow off. Well, nobody ever blew off a gig, but they just made it difficult for the person who was doing the paperwork. And that person was me at the time. And I bitched to Phyliss about it and told her I wanted to fire Kenny Milliken, because he was just so irresponsible about getting anything in a timely fashion. And she said, it's not our job to make them conform. It is our job to make it possible for them to perform. And that this whole thing was not an aid of better paperwork. This whole job was in order to get these people into schools and allow them to perform. My job was to make their life easier, not theirs to make my life easier. That was profound.
That is.
I really took that to heart. Not everybody who's creative does well with bureaucracy. In fact, I think we can pretty well say that the people who are creative don't do well with bureaucracy. And it really should be the job of the attendant bureaucracy to make those people's lives easier, not harder. It was something that Phyliss really took to heart, though it may not seem like it at times, because certainly she had her own idiosyncrasies. And God help you if you said no to Phyliss.
I mean, if you consider the fair as a whole, somebody sort of had to say, I want a playground for people to play in as Elizabethan peasants.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had to find the space, pay for the insurance, get a parking lot, and do all that stuff so we could then turn around and play there.
Yes, and that was one of the problems, that there was real lack of that sort of individual. I mean, somebody who could do all that is a very unusual person and really should be treasured. Working really uphill against a lot of very prejudiced against us bureaucracy. Because, even before we had a chance to burn any bridges with government officials, they were kind of opposed to the whole concept of those dirty hippies, which
in Agora.
Oh, yeah. And other places, too. It is a long-standing tradition with government officials that Renaissance fair people are not to be trusted and generally not the cream of society, shall we say. And I know it's always been an uphill struggle to get permits, and it's an ongoing one for everybody, even out there at bureaucracy heaven of Southern Fair as it is today. They have a lot of trouble getting all their permits through because of the long-standing prejudice against fairs, which to some extent is an earned distrust.
Well, I'd like to leave this interview with one final sort of observation / question.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, if you will, a world where there's the Phyliss Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fair. I'd like you to give me your acceptance speech. You can thank whoever you like, and the band will not play you off.
Wow. Well, so many people who, first and foremost, Morgan Owens Keeley, without whom I would not have the skills to conduct my life's path. and before him, Phyliss Patterson, without whom neither Morgan nor I would have had our life's calling. We would not have had the opportunity to have a place to practice our art, a place to sell our art without Phyliss. And she made it a magic, I'm going to say a magical place to conduct our lives. And it was fun. I mean, there was a lot of bitching going on, but Phyliss made it fun. And I don't think it was just because we were young either. I've never had so much fun at a place of employment as I have had at Faire. Even when being in a booth was hard, it wasn't a hardship, if you know what I mean, the difference there. It was always a good time was had. But who else? Well, all the people that have worked with me in the booth, my daughter especially, who from a very early age was child labor. And so Jesse is a big reason that the booth was a success and kept going. And all the people who have worked for me in the booth, Jeff, Amber, Denise, Nancy, Leslie, and Lori. I mean, everybody who has ever worked with me in the booth has made it possible for that booth to be a success. But once again, we're going to come back to Phyliss, without whom we would not be here. So there you are.
Well, I think that's a good time to stop recording. So, well, that's my 2023 interview with Cora Hendershot. Questions or comments can be directed to me at djng@earthlink.net. If you or somebody you know would like to be interviewed as part of Fair Folk at Work, please feel free to contact me at djng@earthlink.net. That's it for this time. Thanks for listening and see you later. Bye-bye.